It was a damp autumn morning in Bath, the kind of morning where the mist lingers stubbornly over the cobblestone streets, and the air smells faintly of wet leaves and distant chimney smoke, when my life, or rather my faith in certain people, began to unravel. I had been living in this quiet corner of the UK for almost 7 years now, my small but tidy two-bedroom flat sitting at the end of a narrow lane lined with Georgian terraced houses, their honey-colored stone glowing faintly even under the dull gray sky, and I loved the town's sense of history, its Roman baths, the quiet rhythm of the Avon River, and the polite nods of neighbors who never quite asked too much about your life unless you volunteered. For years, I had worked as a restorer at an antique furniture shop on Broad Street, repairing oak chests, Victorian sideboards, and the occasional ornate Regency table, a job that paid modestly but fed my soul, and it was at this shop 4 years ago that I first met Henry, tall, with that easy kind of charm that sneaks past your guard before you realize you've let someone into your world. He was a furniture supplier, often bringing in pieces from estates across Somerset, and he had a knack for storytelling, spinning tales about each item's supposed past, tales so vivid that sometimes I half believed them. Over time, our business conversations turned into coffee breaks into dinners, and dinners into the quiet comfort of knowing someone's footsteps on your stairs. I thought I knew him, his habits, his values, his little quirks, like how he'd tap his mug twice before sipping or hum faintly when reading the paper. But as I would discover, what I knew was only the surface of a much darker reality. The first crack appeared one Thursday evening when I came home to find my mother, who lives in Bristol and occasionally visits, sitting on my sofa with eyes red from crying, holding her handbag in both hands like she needed to anchor herself. She had come earlier than planned, she said, hoping to surprise me with her famous apple tart, but when she arrived, Henry had been here, and something had happened that she refused to fully explain at first, only saying he had been cruel and disrespectful, her voice trembling with a kind of quiet humiliation I had never seen in her. I pressed her gently, my stomach knotting, until the truth came out in broken phrases. Henry had mocked her for her accent, called her an old busybody, and when she tried to leave, he'd blocked the doorway for several minutes, smirking like it was a joke before stepping aside. My hand shook as she spoke, not just from anger but from the deep, almost primal outrage that someone I trusted, someone I'd let into my home, had reduced my mother to tears. At first, I wanted to confront him immediately, to storm over to his place in Larkhall and demand an explanation, but my mother begged me not to, saying it would only cause more trouble, that men like him don't change. Still, I couldn't just let it go, so I started watching, listening, paying attention to things I had ignored before, and the more I looked, the more I found cracks in the picture I'd painted of Henry. There were whispered comments from mutual acquaintances about his temper, a vague warning from a pub landlord about not getting too close, and then, one late night while Henry was asleep in my bed, I noticed his phone light up with a message from a woman whose name I didn't recognize. The preview text read, "Same place as last time? I'll bring the wine," winky face. And though I didn't open it, the implication burned into my mind. Over the next few weeks I gathered more, not in a dramatic movie-like way, but in the slow, methodical manner of someone determined to see the truth with their own eyes. I saw him at odd hours in parts of town where he had no reason to be, overheard snippets of conversations on his phone that ended abruptly when I entered the room, and even caught a faint whiff of unfamiliar perfume on his scarf one evening. The final piece came when an acquaintance from the shop, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Whitmore, told me quietly that she had once seen Henry with another woman, much younger, on the train to London, holding hands and laughing like lovers. It was then I decided he would not get away with humiliating my mother and deceiving me. Not quietly, not politely, and certainly not without consequences. Revenge, I knew, would require patience, precision, and above all, the element of surprise. I began by withdrawing slowly from his life, not in a way he would notice immediately, but in small, deliberate steps. Fewer invitations to dinner, less enthusiasm when he told his stories, and a subtle but unmistakable shift in my tone when we spoke. At the same time, I began reaching out to some of the people Henry had crossed over the years. An old business partner he'd cheated, a landlord he'd stiffed on rent, and even an ex-girlfriend who, as it turned out, had her own trove of damning stories. We met quietly, compared notes, and pieced together a portrait of a man who thrived on manipulation, always staying just ahead of the fallout he created. With their help, I collected documents, messages, and photos, all of which painted Henry not as the charming supplier everyone thought they knew, but as a liar, a cheat, and a petty bully. The next step was execution, and for that, I chose the annual Bath Antiques Fair, the biggest event in our small professional circle where dealers, restorers, and buyers from across the UK gathered. Henry always attended, both for business and for the social prestige, and I knew he would be there with his usual air of superiority. On the day of the fair, I arrived early, setting up my stall with meticulous care, and quietly distributed a small, elegantly bound booklet to a select group of attendees. Inside were excerpts from the evidence I had gathered, presented not as a crude exposé but as a series of case studies in unethical behavior in the antiques trade, each anonymized but obvious enough to anyone who knew Henry. I didn't need to name him. The combination of dates, locations, and patterns made it clear, and within an hour, whispers began to ripple through the crowd. I watched from my corner as Henry's confident stride slowed, as acquaintances began avoiding eye contact, as potential buyers drifted away from his table. By midday, someone, I suspect one of his former allies, had confronted him openly. And his voice, normally so smooth, rose in a defensive, almost panicked pitch. By the end of the day, he had packed up early, his face pale and tight with fury, and left without saying goodbye. Over the next few weeks, the ripple effects spread. Suppliers stopped taking his calls, invitations to key events dried up, and I heard through the grapevine that his most lucrative client had cut ties entirely. As for me, I never heard from him directly again, though I did receive a curt, unsigned note in the post that read only, "You'll regret this," but I didn't, not for a single moment. My mother, when I told her what I'd done, simply took my hand and said, "You stood up for me," and in that moment, under the quiet rain of another Bath morning, I knew that was enough.